Congressman John Campbell took over, anointed by David Dreyer. John Campbell retired. He anointed Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo retired. No, he anointed Tom Cotton. John Campbell anointed Tom Cotton. Tom Cotton anointed Mike Pompeo. When Mike Pompeo went to state, he anointed Representative Mike Gallagher. When Representative Gallagher retired to go to the Hudson Institute, he anointed Representative Mike Waltz. And now Mike Waltz is going to the White House as National Security Advisor, so I don't know who Mike's going to nominate, but I got the previous holder of the Dreyer chair, Mike Gallagher, back. Congressman, good to see you again. I think I'm now running Siege Perilous here, if anyone knows their Arthurian legends. And by the way, the Cavs are 12-0. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning, Hugh. I think what's clearly happened here is what is referred to in industry and on Wall Street as the Gallagher Bump. I tend to have the Midas touch. And when I bestowed this chair benevolently on Mike Waltz, he went from being a largely unknown congressman to national security advisor. So really, he's standing on the shoulders of giants. I just would like to point that out. The giants in this case being you and me. So the future of national security is determined on this particular hour of the Hugh Hewitt show. That is the lesson.
And we're going to do more of that by talking about the Department of Defense. Now, I don't know if Senator Rubio is going to be the Secretary of State or not. It's leaked in the New York Times, so it's and widely repeated. But there's no DOD yet. And I know you're writing about this for the Wall Street Journal tomorrow. Can you give me a little peek about what you think? Not a name, but maybe a skill set for DOD, Congressman Gallagher?
Well, I'll do both. And I think if you read Gates's memoirs, if you read John Lehman's memoirs of the 600-ship Navy, if you go all the way back to Eisenhower and Secretary Wilson, from which period the term bang for a buck emerges, and that was sort of the essence of the Eisenhower New Look strategy. How do we get more bang for a buck by relying on nuclear weapons, our first offset, as it were? What emerges from that is the lesson that unless the Secretary of Defense, backed by the president, prioritizes change, change will not happen, and the bureaucracy will win. In some sense, to put a more colorful point on it, the next Secretary of Defense has to launch a war, not with China, not with Iran, but with the Pentagon bureaucracy, and be ruthless in his prioritization. I think the obvious task for the Secretary of Defense to focus on, with a talented Secretary of the Navy, is rebuilding the Navy and fixing our shipbuilding industrial base. It is a massive problem. It's going to require the time and attention every single day of the Secretary of Defense, armed with a talented team, in order to grow the size of the fleet, in order to deter a war with Xi Jinping. Beyond that, there's some creative things the Secretary of Defense can do to start thinking like an insurgent in the Indo-Pacific if you want to get more bang for the buck rather than counting on a massive infusion of new resources. Take all the money that the Pentagon wastes at the end of every year, upwards of $15 billion, and plow it into multi-year appropriations for critical munitions, the long-range precision fires that can sink Chinese ships. We want the Secretary of Defense to be signaling every single day to Xi Jinping that if he is stupid enough to try and invade Taiwan, we will put the entire PLA Navy on the bottom of the Taiwan Strait. Now, the good news is, among those being rumored, there's some incredibly talented people. As you and I know well, another beneficiary of the Hewitt-Gallagher bump, Robert O'Brien, whose ascendancy to National Security Advisor started on your show when him and I co-authored an article together before I was a member of Congress. It would be great for America if Robert O'Brien could serve. Senator Joni Ernst, Army veteran, sees the threats to America clearly. John Ratcliffe, rumors that he might go to CIA, all but could go to DOD. Incredible guy, knows the intel world very well. So there are some great names being floated out there. They need the backing of the president to make some transformative change and restore our deterrent within the next 2 years, not 4 years, 2 years. 2027 is the year Xi Jinping has set a date for invading Taiwan. The next SecDef needs to move heaven and earth to bend the bureaucracy to his will and fire anybody that gets in his or her way.
Now, I'm glad we've got China Hawks and Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz. But for defense, I'm talking about S-4C. Ships, submarines, satellites, supersonic missiles, and cyber. Is that it in a nutshell? I mean, I know we need AI. I know we need all these advanced acquisition methodology, but we need ships and submarines and satellites and supersonics and cyber because they're asymmetrical weapons, and we need a lot of them.
Yeah, and when it comes to ships, we do a variety of things. Obviously, we need to rebuild our surface navy, but submarines are really at the top of my mind right now. Not just because they remain our asymmetric advantage relative to China, but also because one of the few good things that the Biden administration did in the realm of defense was the AUKUS agreement. This is the pact we struck with the Brits and the Aussies, whereby we provide the Aussies our sensitive nuclear submarine technology. Great idea. The only problem is AUKUS is dying a slow death because we can't build enough subs. We have an anemic 1.2 hulls a year that we're building. We need to get to 2.5. So I would really prioritize undersea. That extends beyond submarines to include autonomous systems. One thing I think the Navy needs is a sort of rapid capabilities office, like some of the other departments have, to really focus on unmanned underwater vehicles, the large variety, aerial combat vehicles. You can talk to Jerry Hendricks about that, one of our foremost Navy nerds, who should also, by the way, be part of the Navy team for the new administration, as well as medium and large unmanned surface vessels. So I would put those at the top of the list. I would also add an M to your acronym. Not that the Pentagon needs another acronym, Hugh, but money. We need money, right? My hope is that Congress will provide a robust budget. We'll get out of this continuing resolution cycle, the stop-start budgeting, which puts money in a trash can and lights it on fire. But failing that, the next Secretary of Defense is going to have to get really creative, potentially reducing the size of the civilian bureaucracy, taking advantage of the appropriated but unspent funds that I referenced earlier, or doing something like merely insisting on the law. The law embeds a preference for commercial items over government items. This is particularly important when it comes to software, where the private sector is just light years ahead of the Defense Department. It's meant to prevent the Pentagon from trying to buy everything or build everything itself when there's a commercial item it can buy off the shelf. This law goes violated every single day. And just look at what happened with SpaceX. NASA predicted it would take $4 billion to build the Falcon 9 rocket. Musk did it for $400 million, relying on commercial procedures and processes. It stands to reason that if we spread that thinking throughout the Department of Defense, you could save tens of billions of dollars merely by complying with the law.
Congressman, I want to end, and it's good to see you again. It really is. And you have mentioned the Bucks and the fact that the Cavs are 12-0. I want to end on the fact that counterespionage has got to be a priority of justice, the FBI, and the Department of Defense. 50,000 military-age male Chinese came over the border in the last 2 years. The Iranians are trying to kill a bunch of our mutual friends. What about counterespionage? Who would you like? Director Wray has announced he's going to resign, and they need someone who knows counterespionage at the Bureau. What kind of emphasis should the Bureau be putting on counterespionage?
Well, you have to assume everything is penetrated. We have public reports about our telecom networks being penetrated, our critical infrastructure being penetrated. So I really think you need two people in the intelligence community broadly. You need people that understand the domestic source of this threat. This is sort of the biggest theme that emerged from my work as chair of the Select Committee on China, which is that this is not just an over there problem. China has penetrated our infrastructure, our universities. They use nonprofits in order to set up illegal police stations on U.S. soil. You need an FBI director who understands that, a CIA director who has a talented counterintelligence team, but you also need very talented cyber professionals. And there I would look to the folks that staffed our Select Committee on China, which range from people like Chris Inglis, who was phenomenal in the cyber community, as well as Tom Fanning, who is the CEO of Southern Company, a rare private sector CEO who understands the importance of cyber, and I think could make a great pick at energy or in a cyber role. So pair those two things together with a talented leader at CIA like Ratcliffe or O'Brien, and then you're cooking with gas. And I got to say, thus far, Trump has hit all of his picks out of the park. So I hope he continues this trend.
You and me both, and they're all serious. They are all serious about China. I think maybe the Select Committee did its work in focusing the country, at least the Republicans, on China. Congressman Mike Gallagher, retired now, except from the Hudson Institute and occasional appearances in the Wall Street Journal and the Hugh Hewitt Show.